we are in the middle of a bunch of tools for mental health. And we're not going as fast as we normally do because there's so much value in this interaction and the processing. So as we talked with Clint about how to do this, we had to think about, do we just jam more presentations at you or take the time to have this back and forth? And we decided that what we wanted to do was to try and have the back and forth. So thank you for helping make that possible. A couple more tools for mental health. So one of the traps that we often get caught in is living in the past or in the future instead of living in the present. And this is sort of Buddhism 101, that living in the present moment is where all your power is. The book that Eckhart Tolle started with was a book called The Power of Now. And he makes the point that all your power is in the present moment. You don't have power in the past. Why don't you have power in the past? Because you can't change it. It's done. And people that are kind of mired down in depression, sometimes it's because they're ruminating about the past, regretting the past, sad about the past. It's understandable. I guess the only power we have in the past is learning from it. Mm-hmm. But you can easily get mired down and stuck in it, worrying and regretting and feeling sad about the past. One way to conceptualize anxiety is fear about the future. What's wrong with, what's not useful about fearing the future? It hasn't happened. It's not here yet. And you know what? It may not happen. You may not get a future.
Can't control it.
You can't control it, but also you may not have it. Like my sister Gina was diagnosed with colon cancer just a year or two ago in October, and she died in December. And she was 60, right? Like, she's never met her grandkids. I don't mean to speak glibly about that, but it was just a really abrupt death. And you just realize that life is fleeting. And so you can waste a lot of your life worrying about the future. If there's a criticism of Orthodox fundamentalist theology, it's its obsession about the past in terms of causing you to live in shame and regret about mistakes you made, or it's about putting all your hopes in a future, some big promise of something in the sky that may or may not ever come. There's a saying that I heard probably from Eckhart Tolle, but maybe from somewhere else, which is, if you're in the line at the grocery store with the person at the cash register, that's the most important person in your life. And that's a really weird concept, right? Because no, Margi, my kids, my friends, people that I work with, there's a million things that are important. There are a million people that are more important to me than that woman at the cash register in the grocery store. But the truth is, when I'm at the cash register at the grocery store, I'm not with my wife. I'm not with my kids. There's no way that I can do anything meaningful with them. But I certainly can smile at this person, pay them a compliment, make them feel good, and ask them about their day, and maybe say something that lifts them up. And that's just sort of one small inkling of the power of now, of the present moment. And so entire books are written about that. This is your idea. Entire books are written about that, but it's a really important concept. And maybe one of the most powerful stories coming from Buddhism. There's several raft stories in Buddhism. But the metaphor that I really like about one of the raft stories in Buddhism is this idea that imagine that you're on one side of the bank and there's a fire or there's something that you're fleeing from. And all of a sudden there's this raft that appears. And so you're gonna be looking to escape from something that's terrible. You're going to get on the raft, And the raft is going to carry you safely to the other side of the river. But once you get to the other side of the river and you're to safety, are you going to destroy the raft that was there for you when you needed it? Are you going to shake your fist at the raft and be angry about it? Or are you going to try and carry the raft with you and carry it around as a burden? Carrying it around like a burden or trying to destroy it or getting angry about it would be nonsensical, because that's not, it was there when you needed it. It was what you experienced when you were experiencing it. But now it's time to let the raft go. And it's time to move on to your next adventure. And so this idea of making peace with what you've experienced, not getting stuck in the past, but also not fearing what might be ahead, because that can be paralyzing, is the concept that we're trying to convey when we talk about the power of living in the present moment. And so that is something that we all can fall victim to, regretting the past or becoming paralyzed by fearing the future. Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think that this is really where
While I drink some coffee.
This is really where the what if syndrome resides, which is what I find to be a very common part of a faith transition. So what if I had never been Mormon? What if I hadn't been, stuck in these gender roles as a woman or a man? What if I hadn't had sexual shame? What if I, just the what ifs that are a real thing to consider. Like, I don't want to minimize that or invalidate those real issues. And at the same time, I think there's a time and a season for that, and not necessarily a place to get stuck in, because that kind of thinking will kind of drive you insane. First of all, you don't really know the what ifs. You don't really have the crystal ball to really help you know if those things, if you hadn't been Mormon, you probably would have still had some level of sexual shame, because you're, at least here in the United States, you're going to have some of that. Gender roles are, again, not necessarily just a Mormon thing, right? The what if, I think, is a trap that can really get people very mired in anger, depression, and anxiety and sadness. So I think there's a moment for that, to validate it, to understand, yes, you were definitely affected by a lot of the things that came out of your Mormon story, and you don't really know what that would have been like if it would have been different. And, you see all my ands that I like, and that I can't change that anyway, right? And now I've learned some valuable things that maybe help me propel myself further in ways that wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't had that experience, right? So there's a lot of ways to frame that differently that I think is much more helpful than just staying in the kind of the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. And that's, that's a saying, right? The grass, don't buy into the grass is always greener. Again, Mormons didn't coin that. That's a concept, a principle that people in general have found to be not necessarily helpful in framing your life going forward.
Well, one of my favorite memories of a quote from Natasha, there's this common dynamic that if I can be vulnerable, I'll admit that I think some of you might share. If you happen to have sort of gotten married a virgin, and if it happens to be that in your life you've only had sex with one person your whole life, which is my situation, it's very common in a faith crisis to think, what about all the good sex I could have had if I hadn't have been Mormon? And all the whatever dysfunction, marital problems, like dissatisfaction with my marriage, what if Margi and I were struggling, if things weren't as exciting, if we're not feeling great about our marriage, maybe if I had not been Mormon, then I would have had a lot more sex and experimentation in high school. And then I could have found like the perfect partner for me. And then we would have had just like 70 years of continual great sex and happiness and joy. But instead I was Mormon. You know what I mean? And Natasha and Margi would be horrified because we actually have a really good sex life. But I'm not bragging. It's just,
you are.
It's fine.
Okay.
It's fine. But Natasha made the point. She's like, you Mormons, you guys in Utah, you Mormons think, in such kind of a closed, circular kind of way. Do you think that outside of Mormonism, there aren't people coming to sex therapists and marriage and family therapists who partied in college and had all the experimentation in the world? They're all seeking therapy too, just for different things. And if they weren't seeking therapy for one thing, they're seeking therapy for another. I'm sure you said it more eloquently.
I mean, how great could the sex be at 19 anyway? I mean, really, right? I mean, I gotta say, I kind of lucked out. I had a really great boyfriend. And I had some really...
In high school.
In high school. But that's kind of the rare story that I get in my sex therapy clinic. And so, we're not very developed. We don't have communication skills. Most of us were given fear-based, sexual education. So people struggle. And the very common story is people who have had really great sex prior to marriage, outside of religious constructs, still struggle in long-term marital sexual relationships. So even the idea that, we should have found out if we were sexually compatible, and I can't believe the Mormons told us not to have sex, and we kissed for the first time across the altar, and now we're not sexually compatible. So are a lot of people who actually had really great sex at one point and still face sexual incompatibilities as they grow older together. So don't give in to weird stories that you know very little about, right? And so lots of people struggle in lots of ways for lots of different reasons. And they're more complex than just a simple narrative. If I hadn't been Mormon, my life would be great, right?
It really is story.
It
right?
is a story.
It's another form of story. So to just capstone this tool, who's willing to share ways that you believe you may have been limited or are limiting yourself by either living in the past or fearing the future? Is anybody willing to? Does this resonate with anyone? Mehdi.
I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was a huge prepper. And one of the reasons for that was that I genuinely believed that somehow I could stave off a terrible apocalyptic future if I saved up enough stuff. And it has taken me a long time to realize how much that permeated a lot of my thinking about the world. I really believed that thinking about bad things that happened would help me to prepare for them, but also that even thinking about them would avert them. It was a weird kind of magical thinking, but I don't think I'm the only person who did this. No. And one of the realities was that I was afraid my entire life as a mother of kids that one of my children would die before I got to know them. And during my pregnancies, I would obsess over this. I would think, this child might die before I get to see them. And then it happened. And I realized when my daughter died that all of that worrying, which I thought would somehow prevent it, had done nothing but poison every day of every pregnancy. And that, I don't know that pregnancy is so wonderful. I hated being pregnant. Other people may have different experiences. So I don't know that I would have been like, I love being pregnant and being huge and ungainly. But at least maybe I wouldn't have spent every minute of pregnancy thinking, oh no, I have to do something somehow to protect this baby, and thinking that would have power to save. Like that, it was this real moment of awakening where I had to stop. It's not that I could suddenly stop myself from worrying about the future, but at least I had to admit to myself that worrying about the future didn't prevent any bad things from happening. And I had to have that magical thinking for so long, and I had to give it up.
Yeah. Thank you. Maddie, do you mind pulling those dividers shut just so that the camera cannot shoot the water bottles in the shot? Thank you. Yes.
My coffee's got a lid on it, so I'm good.
Don't spill your coffee.
Yeah, so this is one I'm carrying a lot of. Am I holding this right? Okay. Yeah, a lot of as I mentioned in my introduction, is years of service in the church, and I feel like, especially during my mission, I gave up the best years of my life. I feel like I had a lot of opportunities. A lot of the fantasies John's talking about, probably I think of too. And and so I'm angry about that. I have my faith crisis as middle-aged. Middle age and a faith crisis is like the perfect storm. It's like if you thought I was really a rebel at 18, wait till I'm 50. Then things go kind of crazy. So I do resent that a bit. And as we've talked about, some of the things that I'm probably putting off is I kind of shut down. I have great neighbors, but I don't talk to them anymore, and they're not judging me. They're really nice people, and I think I'm missing what I did like about the church is it gave me a chance to serve. I remember as a deacon, my dad took me home teaching. We used to have home teaching. Now they changed it, something else, ministering or something. But I often think of that here I was, I went to an elderly lady, and we were her home teacher. And I thought, what a great, and as I grow older, I thought, I would have never met that woman. And even when I went on my mission, she would always call me by my first name, and it was like an angel talking to me. And I miss that. So what I've learned from this group is, getting back and instead of being, introverted and just self-pity and sitting there talking about, woe is me, and look at all the opportunities I've missed, is I've had a great life. And I know I've heard a lot of the challenges others have, and I feel a little guilty. It's like, wow, my challenges aren't nearly as much as everyone else's. I'm a privileged white male in the church and had every benefit that came with that, and no one ever told me what I couldn't do. I always had the freedom to do what I wanted. And so I've tried to inspire that in my own kids. And now I think as a latter of my life, second part of my life is trying to help others make good choices on their own. So.
So my wife and I play this game probably about once a week or so of what I missed that. But no. The game of what if we had to join the church, or what if she had to join the church? Instead of going through law school now, she would have done a career earlier, chosen her career earlier, probably put off having kids for a while in pursuit of the professional career. Spending 2 years of my mission, even though there were valuable things that we gained from our missions, that's time that we would have spent, advancing our careers. Tithing was a huge thing. I didn't come up with a number. I did not have the courage to figure out how much I spent in tithing, but that at the cost of my family is a huge thing. So all of these what ifs were huge burdens, are still burdens that we occasionally play that game, and it's very painful to think about those lost opportunities that we would have done differently. And so the challenge for us still is trying to put those aside and figure out what to do with the present.
So I read the book Educated just this last year, and I know everybody just resonated so much, but it really like put into paper kind of, I had a lot of parallels with her growing up. We lived in northern Utah, and it wasn't that extreme for sure, but I feel like where our paths split, where she went to school, I stayed in the narrative of like, okay, now I'm get married, have kids, and this is and that's kind of the trajectory I went on. But as a child, I dreamed of living in a penthouse in New York City and running a company. Like, I had big dreams, and I mean, all of my brothers are successful. I have 2 lawyers. I've always had, like, my stepdad, who was a lawyer, told me that I should be a lawyer, and I would hear those things, and my heart would kind of leap, and then I think, no, but that's not my role. So I think, like, at this point in my life, like, I could have followed those kind of things, and now I've sort of missed the boat. But I have gone back to school from time to time, and after I read the book, I re-enrolled to go back to school, because it's not necessarily about the career. I think it is about the education. It is about following your dream and your passion, and just kind of figuring that out. But I often think, that I'm in this spot, and I wanted to be over there in that spot. But anyway.
And that's real. And we're not saying, don't regret, don't be sad, don't be angry about the past. Again, it's going to be a grieving process, and we have to bring acceptance to that, and we have to grieve it.
And there's purpose in it. Like you're saying, you're re-enrolling in school, right? Or you're shifting your ideas about how you want to be in your community, so these feelings do propel shifts and changes in us, and so they do have a purpose. And you do have a right to be angry. It's just we don't want to just get stuck there. That's the only thing we're saying, right? We don't want to get stuck and then have that negatively affect us into spaces of clinical depression, anxiety, those kinds of things. So it's balancing the feelings, helping those feelings assess, and then what are you going to do with that assessment of where you're going to move next. But I don't know any human who isn't dealing with some level of the what-if syndrome, whether it's religious or family or career or whatever.
So the Educated book, I totally relate, and I had a guy at a Swedish bookstore recommend it to me as a book, and you should have seen his face when I said that I used to be Mormon and that I had been a hoarder and I had homeschooled my children to protect them from the evils of the world. His face, he just was one of the most priceless. So this is what he was shocked. He was like, could this even be real? And I just started laughing. So I'm also from northern Utah. But here's my thing that comes kind of with that. Tara could have never written that story if everything in her life had gone perfectly. So what if we just don't have boring lives? What if we get to have been raised in this religion and have lived one life, and now we get to have a whole other life, and that life is so much more interesting from where we've come from. And instead, we get to kind of be warriors and winners in our lives, and we get to show our children what it is to turn our lives around halfway through. And we get to have so much more depth and interest to our little life tapestry than we ever could have if we'd gotten a PhD when we were 25. I don't know.
I love that.
It's my story, I tell myself.
I think it was a client or a friend I was talking to who's left the church, and he said something really profound to me, and I wish I knew who it was. But he basically said, "You couldn't give me $1 million to take away my past, but you couldn't give me $1 million to go through it again." You know what I mean? It's like, I value my past, even though I never want to repeat it. You know what I mean? And I thought that was really profound, and I love that framing.
It's a huge part of radical acceptance. Like, we wouldn't be who we are today without our past experiences. We think we've come into this wisdom just out of the blue sky, but really we've come into this wisdom through our experiences, and that's just part of the human journey. And one last thought, this is kind of what something Brett said. I just want to point out that I think in the grand spectrum of problems that come through my office, yeah, I guess maybe there is a severity scale. Maybe there's some problems that I'm like, wow, that's really heavy. At the same time, I always try to remind everybody, this is not trauma competition. Like, we're all hurting. Hurt is hurt. Pain is pain. And so let's not get caught in that trap either of, oh, I don't have a right to my feelings because somebody else has had such a more difficult experience than me. I think that we all deserve to feel our own pain the way it shows up. So I just want to validate your pain. Okay.
Others want to share any way they're being limited by past or future? Anyone? Ready to move on? Okay. Tool number 5. Discovering your authentic self through mindfulness meditation versus being disconnected from your true self. Sometimes coaches or public speakers are accused of offering really glib, simplified kind of platitudes, pithy platitudes that really beg the question of what they actually mean, but they sound really good. And that idea of discovering your true self can be one of those sorts of things, because we're all going to go, yeah, we all need to find our true self. But then you ask, what does that mean? And how do you do that? And that's the hard part. And yet, I think that the biggest, the most violent thing that any system can do in that first half of life, the thing that can be most damaging is systematically disconnecting us from ourselves. I really believe that. We're not trained to think about what we care about. We're not trained to think about what we like. We're not trained to think about what's true for us, what's moral for us, what's useful, what brings us joy. Instead, we're plugged into the system that tells us what our morality is, that tells us what our values should be, that tells us what should be important to us, like you're all kind of saying, and then tells us what life we need to live. And I don't think it's pernicious or nefarious in terms of intent, but in played out reality, many, many, many lives get underutilized. There's that quote from Little Women where I think a man says to Joe, you could have been a great teacher. Does anyone know that line? You could have been a great teacher, and she responds, I could have been a great many things. Right? And the opportunity of this faith crisis, maybe one of the most powerful ones, is for us to go on that journey of self-discovery. Because what happens when you're living someone else's life for you? What happens? What happens when you're living someone else's values in life? What does that do to you? How does it make you feel? What? Empty? Inauthentic? Sad? Depressed? Compromised? Violated? Right? So this question of who am I is probably the great question. And it might be one of the hardest things to figure out, and yet that's what we need to do. We need to get still and figure out who am I and what do I care about? So many of you are like, I don't know who I am, and I don't know what my purpose or mission should be. And if that's the case, then you really need to put more effort into figuring that out and prioritizing it. And I don't mean to be sermonizing you or lecturing you about that, but the value of these tools is just to point you in directions that could be useful. And so the question is asked, how do you figure out who you are? And the only thing I can say is by getting still, by learning to sit with yourself and to tune out other voices. Sometimes turn off the podcast, turn off the Netflix, turn off relationships and go on walks or meditate or write or journal. Spend time alone and get used to letting go of all the distractions that keep you occupied, but that are actually blocking you from developing insight into who you are and what you care about. And it can be scary to sit with that silence and to sit with yourself and to turn off those distractions. But it is one of the most important things that we all need to do to then tap into our own inner reserve of who we are and what we care about and what gets us excited, right? So mindfulness is one way of learning. It's developing a practice. If weightlifting builds your muscles, mindfulness builds your ability to be introspective, to start tuning into who you are and what you care about. Learning to sit with yourself, tune out the distractions, and then see what arises for you. And there are a million apps now. This is like all the new rage. It's Calm app. It's, what is it, 5% Happier? What are the apps? You know them. 10% Happier. What are all the apps? Mindfulness apps. Headspace. There's a million of them. And this is all the rage. And people have a really hard time doing mindfulness. Have any of you ever tried to meditate and had this experience? And part of the problem is expectation. You think that meditating is supposed to be this thing where you arrive at this Zen state where your mind is clear and you feel great. But what often happens is your mind starts raging. The more that you try and clear your mind, the more crazy it becomes. And so guided meditation helps, where these apps will walk you through a mindfulness process where you listen to bells or gongs or chimes or water rushing or little narratives or homilies or whatever it is. They can help guide you. And we don't have time to really dig into it a lot, but there are a ton of benefits of meditation in addition to developing insight. It reduces pain and enhances the body's immune system. It can improve feelings of depression and anxiety and anger. It increases your blood flow, provides a sense of peace and calm. It can reverse heart disease. It can increase your energy. It can reduce your stress. Like, so many benefits. It's a resource available to all of us, and it's something that still we really struggle to do. I wish Margi were still here, because when I got excommunicated and when we had some pretty severe marital problems, she took up meditation. And she just downloaded the Calm app, and she just started 10 minutes a day doing a guided meditation. And she will tell you, she's a person who has high anxiety. She's a perfectionist. She would be a person who worries and stresses a lot and gets overwhelmed in her emotions and in her life. And what she would bear witness to you if she were here is the transformative power of just a 10-minute meditation exercise once a day. She wakes up in the morning every single day, gets her phone off the side of her bed, lies there in bed, and does a 10-minute meditation exercise. And I want to invite you to consider, if you don't have a daily meditation practice, to start. And there are, other than these benefits, it can help you develop insight about who you are, what you value, and what you want to do with the rest of your life. And it also provides this function when we talked about not being too attached to labels or stories or emotions. Mindfulness helps you develop the practice of separating yourself from your thoughts. Just by noticing what thoughts I'm having, noticing how I'm feeling, noticing the stories that your brain is generating, develops this space between your conscious self and the thoughts and the feelings and the stories that your brain is generating. And once you learn to hold those stories and labels and emotions a little less tightly, that gives you freedom to act in a way that you otherwise wouldn't have. And so that's one of the big values of mindfulness and meditation is it gives you more freedom to not be as reactive in your life. But it's like a muscle. You have to cultivate that muscle to strengthen it. So just really quickly, have any of you developed a mindfulness practice? And if so, can you bear witness as to how it's helped?
Before that, I would say,
please, Natasha.
So the only way you can fail at meditation is to think you're failing at meditation. So even can you put it back on the slide with the, because this is what happens to me. And so I thought, oh, well, then I don't know how to do it. And I tried it like 10 years ago, and then I gave it up for a while. And then, but really, if this is what's happening, that's information to you. So meditation is just for you to be able to get information. So as long as you're not judging yourself about what shows up, then that's meditation, right? So now I'm much better at saying, oh, that's interesting that that's where my brain went, right? Or, oh, that's interesting that now I'm feeling this feeling. And so it's just all information as you either do it guidedly or do it on your own. So it's just the framing of it, I think, is very important, to not feel like you've got some big expectation of it and then think you're failing at it.
With that, I think a lot of people, especially a lot of guys, feel like it's froofy. And I think that meditation also, it can be simply sitting in your backyard and having your mind listen to all the sounds it can hear.
Yeah.
Or another one that I do real quick, if I've just had a busy day, just to kind of bring me back, is I kind of try to notice what's in abundance in this world. And that's actually been one of the most powerful things for me, because I'll literally say, wow, we have an abundance of lighting, and we have an abundance of air conditioning, and we have an abundance of carpeting. Can you imagine if we just had wood floor, pebble floors, or we have an abundance of tables? And when you do that, it actually creates this world where if you're feeling sorry for yourself or feeling sad, all of a sudden you just really realize how much abundance we have in this world. So that itself is a meditation. So I think I used to always think meditation was literally I set my clock for 20 minutes and I listen to the music and I try to get my mind to come to a place where it's not thinking, and it's not, it doesn't always have to be that. It's just can literally be, like I said, you sit in a beautiful spot and see what you can see and name things, and just kind of bring you to a place where you're just thinking about that moment. So
beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
So I started meditating because we were, my husband had gone through a job loss, and it was for an extended period of time. And I had a new baby, and my son had given up a baby for adoption, and my daughter got married in the temple, all at the same time, within the same few months. And I feel like I have maybe a little ADD. My thoughts just a little bit drove me crazy. It was constantly rumination, constant thinking about all and worrying and everything. And one night I turned to meditation on an app, and I just thought I'm just going to try it. And in fact, I did it just laying in bed. Which they say that you fall asleep. So I think mostly people recommend you're sitting up in a chair if you're doing the official meditating practice. which, as Marianne said, it could be a lot of things, but I just laid in bed and I meditated for 20 minutes. And after, I felt like I had been on a vacation. Like my thoughts that drove me crazy, like I had respite from them. It was like this real restful space that I had never experienced before. And so I craved it at that point. Every day I would do it at least once a day, sometimes twice or 3 times a day, because life was just so stressful. And in that coming to know myself, that's when I started to sit in sacrament meeting and listen to people talk and realize that things did not resonate with my true self. And so I feel like I had kind of a conversion process to that. In fact, the very last Sunday I went to church, I gave a talk in which I testified of meditation. I couldn't do a whole lot more than that at the time. In fact, I sat down and I thought, everybody in this whole ward is looking at me like an apostate right now. And I haven't gone back. But I did get a lot of comments. Wow, you had great insight. So I also realized through that thoughts that I thought were coming from Satan were actually my thoughts. And that Satan wasn't whispering in my ear, and that I could redirect my thoughts. So it was actually a very life-changing experience for me to find meditation. And through meditation, I found yoga, same sort of concept. And anyway, life-changing. I really think that was the most important thing that I've done for myself through this. So,
thank you.
I started doing a little bit of meditating, and I will be honest, I've been practicing it for several months, and still 90% of the time my mind is racing, but it's becoming habitual. But when my husband and I first separated, my kids were struggling a lot, specifically one of my daughters who has kind of some high anxiety like me, and she was not sleeping at night because he wasn't in the home, and she wasn't feeling safe, and she was scared, and so then she was sleeping with me, then I was getting no sleep, and then I was more of a wreck, and this was going on for several weeks. And so finally I said, I think you need to do some meditating with me. So we started practicing together, and so I just thought for the moms that have kids that are struggling, so I now have time with each of my daughters. I do a little meditation with them, and then on the Calm app, that's the only one I use. I'm sure this is the same on the others, but on their app, they also have like stories so my daughter that struggles will do the 10-minute session with me, and then she will put on like Peter Rabbit or whatever, the calming voice, and that helps her fall asleep. So now I'm getting more sleep. So I think this can be good for our kids to learn how to practice this, especially when they lose the church. And then for my kids, their life's just kind of in turmoil. And I've also just noticed for me that, and this sort of piggybacks off what you said, is that since I started meditating, I have just become more of a noticer in life. And I just think, like, how many rainbows did I miss before this? And how many birds did I not hear before this? Because I was so busy and distracted in my life. And so it helps me to be able to notice other things that I probably missed out on before. So I'm a big fan of meditating.
Beautiful.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of God, maybe just a little bit. For me, as a believing member, I had this concept that God was some bearded guy that lived in Kolob and sat on a throne, and he was out there somewhere in space, and so you would scream out to him, where are you? Why aren't you listening to me? And so going through a faith crisis, you lose that, and I think some people brought up here they lost their relationship with God and with Christ, and I did that too. I lost that beautiful relationship, but through meditation and kind of churning inward, Christ mentioned that the kingdom of God is within us. We can find that I found that God has always been there. I am God, and he's always been there with me, or she's always been there with me, whatever gender God is to you. And I think we talk a little bit about you've always had the answer. Turn inward, and there's the answer. You just got to trust yourself and have faith in yourself, and there it is, and it's amazing and it's beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you, Adam, because I was actually thinking along those lines. My favorite, I loved going to the temple. It was a good experience. And my last time going to the temple, I loved going to the temple because of the celestial room. You get to sit in the celestial room, and I would always sit on the couch and close my eyes and pray to Heavenly Father. And the prayers were always the most powerful, and I just felt like He was right there with me, and He would answer, and we'd have this conversation back and forth. And the last time I went, it was actually after my husband had left the church officially, and I was upset about it, and I didn't know what that meant for our family, for our future. And so I had all these worries I was taking to the temple, and I sat there and prayed, and I just got this awesome calm feeling that of eternity and the future, and that everything was going to be okay, and that just this beautiful revelation to me. And I love that that was my last experience, because I'll always treasure that. And now, coming out of belief, losing God, I look at that experience through different eyes. I know that is I was able to have those awesome experiences in the temple, in the celestial room, because it was so quiet, and it was so peaceful, and it was beautiful. And that wasn't necessarily the Mormon Heavenly Father. It was in me. It was in me. And I have the power now to go to a quiet place and have that experience anytime I want. I don't have to drive 2 hours and go through a 2-hour session and do all those crazy weird things to finally sit and meditate and have that beautiful experience. I can now have that experience whenever I want. And I'm excited. I haven't really done that yet. I have the app, but I haven't actually done that yet. But I'm excited for the opportunity that I know that I can. And I just need more time. I haven't figured it out yet.
One of the things that, we talk about often is, again, how there's truths within our traditions, right? When you think about religions in general, it's not like Mormonism owns prayer, right? Or worship, the idea of worship, or the idea of sitting in a celestial room, And so when you look at all the faith traditions, there's all these really invitations for people to sit still within themselves. Unfortunately, they've been hijacked a bit by how exactly to do them, and or worthiness. You have to be in a certain space, or a certain, wearing a certain garb, or and a lot of religions have these things. Pay 10%. But the reality is that there's truth to these narratives that are so old, they're so ancient, right? Where people have found out, oh, if I sit in a still space, there's something useful about that. If I try to, connect with something larger than myself, there's something useful about that. And so I think there's great beauty in seeing the wisdom of the traditions we come from, and then reclaiming them for ourselves in ways that still resonate, whether it's mindfulness, or whether it's still prayer, or whether it's finding sacred rituals that we now ritualize for ourselves, because there is power in ritual, and there is power in these kinds of ideas that, especially when we reclaim them, no longer belong to somebody else, they belong to us. So I think it's beautiful. Yeah.
So when you asked who's been meditating, my immediate thought was, oh, that's my avoidance. That goes to that. Because it's something I know I need to do, but I think in some ways it terrifies me in many ways. And I actually wrote about this in a poem, and I just wanted to read it because I feel like it expresses, but it's called Distractions Kill. Silence scares me, so I find noise to fill the void, like a good addict who wants to be sober but is not ready, lacking self-discipline, because I am weak, like he said. Silence provides space for his lingering programming to remind me that I will fail, that my life will mean nothing on my own, incapable of self-direction, like he hoped. Noise and distraction are my poorly chosen coping skills that are more like restraints, keeping me in an in-between, where I have left him, but still hear his echo. So I busy my mind to drown him out, knowing sadly I too can't breathe, but I am accustomed to lacking self-preservation, like he made me. Silence forces me to not only hear how much of a hold he still has on me, but it also requires me to confront the weakness of my own voice. I am ashamed to meet me, so with noise I lie and shout loudly that I am strong, puffing up in order to survive. Hearing my normal voice would be too self-deprecating, the weaker version, like he taught. Noise momentarily saves me, helps me sustain my distance from him, so I busy myself and then crash, even though I know it is bad for me, and while I want different, it became the way I run from him and pretend that I have made it, when really my life is just a series of screams, timed perfectly. Silence is a luxury for those who have always thought their life was their own. I am too afraid to finally hear, because in silence I would confront what is left of me, which I fear is something small, something raised to take up little space. With noise I can self-aggrandize, fake a presence to feel important, like he is. Noise kills me, even after I have survived so long. Now I am the cause of my slow death. The death that is cruel, where I exist but weakly. A life of shouting to make noise. I hate that I do this to myself and never know who to blame. Is it murder? Because he programmed me to speak softly, to be meek and lowly. Is it suicide? Because it is technically my hands that position the earbuds in self-delusion. All because the bravery in me cannot bear to meet the woman he crafted in his image. Silence would save me from a shadow self if I could just stand to sit with the broken woman I am, if I could just stand to hear the weak voice I have, if I could just stand to accept with rebirth, I can become something new, something with more of an existence without him, against his will. Naked is how I feel when I sit in silence and know I'm not ready for a side-by-side, posted for an ego boost. In silence, the me that has to exist without him is a version of me I currently despise, one I have not yet forgiven for being weak and turning into his child. I want to live a full life, but am not confident, so I tune out the minutes and inadvertently prove him right, like he knew I would. Silence is for life, not death. So if I can master ease and comfort in my skin being still, then I will be able to become the smart, inventive, funny, trickster, bold woman I see as me. If I can endure starting at a weak place and not turn away from the image that shows how far away I am for what I want to be, then I could have hope for making life one lived. If I can remind myself that while I may still have to live in his kingdom, I can pick my participation level, then I can reclaim some of my existence and make the minutes of it reflect back the part of me that is free. Silence, while hurting me, will be my savior in a way he never was. He will die a slow, agonizing death in my silence. In my silence, he will see me become something he did not determine. Silence. Woman, my God, be silent.
Wow. I'm just going to say, wow. That was really powerful.
Thank you.
If you want to share that poem in our group, I'm sure a lot of people would
We would all love it,
read
yeah.
it.
So meditation for me has been a little bit different, but so hopeful. I took a class called Soul Restoration, and it just resonated with me that that's what my soul needed to be restored. And it started out with doing a timeline of my life and writing down every horrible thing that had happened to me. And after I got all that out, I had to turn around and go back and look at that and rewrite it. Even though I was abused, I have turned out to be a wonderful mother and have not abused my children, even though this happened to me, you know. And so I rewrote it in a positive form. And then they asked me to spend a day in meditation with the restoration team that I had to choose for myself, my younger self, my truth teller, and my 80-year-old self. And I laughed and said, oh, yeah, right. I don't even know who my younger self is, and she's so hurt and so damaged that I don't even know what she looks like. And so I set out to do that exercise to prove them that it couldn't work. It wasn't going to work. And I was absolutely determined that day that I had home alone that I was going to prove that this didn't work. And in the exercise, they asked you when you got in touch with your truth, with your restoration team, to ask them what gift they had for you. So it took me a long time to find that hurt little girl, but I had an image of a 5-year-old grandson that I could use, who was perfect, and I never wanted to see him hurt. So I used that image, and once I got that image, I could think about myself, and I asked her some questions. I have this beautiful journal that I journaled all this in, and I asked her what the gift was that she had for me, and she said, "You are so good." And that was really significant for me because I was pretty sure I was born bad. So for those words to come to me, "You are so good," was really significant. My truth teller, the question I had for him was, will I ever get to meet her? And the answer that day that I got back was, if you want to meet her, you'll meet her. I had no idea how that was going to happen because I believed it was never going to happen. We had hired an agency to find her, and they lied to us and said they found her, but she didn't want to have anything to do with me. So then when I contacted my 80-year-old self and spent some time with her and wrote down all the questions I had and answered them, she told me that I was okay and that I had always been okay. So I finished that thinking, wow, I set out to prove that wrong, and it was such an amazing day. So fast forward a couple of years, I kept getting voices and friends and people telling me that I needed to start a blog, and I kept saying, no, I'm not a writer, I don't know, no. And so finally I gave in, and I started this blog because I had it already written. And I got to the point in the blog where I needed to tell my story, and I stopped. Because the blog scared me in the first place because it was about my life, and my kids didn't know a lot about my life, and now they're reading this blog. Mom, this is really good, but is this really? So I stopped when I got to my story. And a year after that, it came back. And he was watching football, and I got up because I was bored, and I went down and sat down, and I wrote my story, or at least a part of it, the significant part. And 6 months later, she found me. And the first thing that I had to give her was my story, so she would know that I had never forgotten, I had never not wanted, I had never not desired to know her and how she is. And right now, as we live in Salt Lake, she lives 20 minutes from me. So that's the power of meditation.
Whew, beautiful. So much power in this room. Can you believe the power in this room? Amazing people in this room.
Yeah.
All right. Well, consider yourselves recipients of a testimony meeting about the power of mindfulness and meditation. That's what we just experienced. Two more points, and then we'll be done with this second presentation. And for me, these are my favorites because they're very personal to me. This is about mental health, and anxiety and depression are two of the most common things that we're afflicted with. And one of the things I realized as a therapist was that you could try and treat the symptoms of anxiety and depression all day long and sometimes make no progress. Just trying to minimize the symptoms of the mood disorder or the anxiety disorder. And what I discovered and what I've lived through my own experience was the values, knowing your values, figuring out what your life needs to be about, what your special purpose is in life, what your special contribution can or should be. If you can figure that out, that single discovery of what you really care about and then how you're going to spend your life pursuing that value can be transformative in terms of your own health and well-being and joy in ways that trying to treat symptoms of a mental disorder never can. And so values is I think the most important part of this acceptance and commitment therapy. Roy Disney wrote, it's not hard to make decisions once you know what your values are. A little bit about values. Values are not goals, so getting a degree is not a value. What's the value?
Education.
Education would be a value, right? Values are not destinations. They are directions. They're things that you literally value. When I realized how badly the term values had been corrupted, when I was growing up in Texas, there was this notion of family values. It was kind of a buzzword in the 80s when Reagan was really popular. Any of you remember what family values meant? What did it mean? It's code for don't be gay, right? Be straight. What else? Don't no premarital sex, right? Mom stays home and has kids. Dad works, right? Traditional family values.
Pro-life.
No abortion, no alcohol, no drugs, no divorce, right? Well, that's how my mind became associated with the term values. Values means a huge old list of things you shouldn't do that a bunch of, white straight men in power basically told us we should, obey and follow. And that's just like with intimacy, which we'll talk about later, which has been corrupted by being associated with what? Sex. Intimacy has been corrupted in that sense. So is the term values. Values simply means, what do you value? What do you value? What do you care about? What turns you on? What gets you excited? What would you do what job would you have if you didn't even receive income from it? Because nothing could keep you from doing it. That's the type of question that the values question kind of imposes upon all of us. What is your purpose? Why are values important? They do two things. They provide you with direction on where you want to go, and they provide you with motivation. When you're sad, when you're lost, when you're depressed, when you're aimless, if you can get in touch with your values and then become really clear about what your purpose in your life and your mission is, and then you just simply, when you're sad or when you're depressed, you're like, wait, what are my values? What can I do today to make a little bit of progress on something that I really care about, or that I really believe in, or that I really feel like is one of my special contributions that I can make to this world, to my family, to myself, to people around me. It can be transformative. And again, one of the biggest disservices that a fundamentalist institution can do to us is by handing us, this is what you're supposed to care about. Now do it. You know what I mean? And we never actually take the time to figure out, no, wait a minute. And a lot of you mothers are saying that. It's like, hey, I love my kids, but I may have had less, or I may have had them later. I may have pursued some other things, but I was never asked what I cared about. I was never asked what I value. I was told what I was supposed to value. So we actually literally have never been given the opportunity to take the time to get still, which is why we talk about meditation and mindfulness before we talk about values, because values can emerge from getting still and tapping into our passions, to what we care about. And that's why values are so important. So I just Googled values, and this is just one of a billion lists of values. Brené Brown's got her own list. You can find all sorts of lists. Acceptance and Commitment Therapy has lists. But some of the values listed on this slide: creativity, curiosity, honesty, integrity, simplicity, respect, transparency, integrity, humor, humility, service, kindness, fun, adventure. The list is endless. It's limitless. What's important is that the values that you choose turn you on, light you up, get you excited. What turns you on? And I don't mean that in a sexual sense, although that's not bad.
Can be.
Can be. It can be.
I have sexual values.
Yes, you can have sexual values. But what lights you up? What turns you on? That's probably one of the most important questions you can have. If you're stuck in depression, if you're stuck in anxiety, if you're stuck in your faith crisis, stop churning about Fanny Alger and peepstones and polyandry and what's on Reddit. Get more in tune to what you want your life to be about, not what you want to stand against, right? Spend less of your time focusing on what you're against. Spend more of your time focusing on what you want to be for, what you want to create, what difference you want to make in the world based on your values. And I will tell you from personal experience that it will transform you. Just one second. It will transform your life. It has the potential to transform your life in ways that nothing else will. So if you don't know what your values are, imagine a blank tombstone, like your tombstone. What would you want to be said about you on your tombstone? This is called the Tombstone Exercise. We're not going to do it, but do it in your mind. What would you want people to say about you? That's one way to think about it. If you were to write a eulogy for your funeral that you would hope your child or partner would offer on your behalf, what are the things you wish that they would say about you? What contributions would you have made in this life if you had kind of a clean slate to be able to decide for yourself? And so you probably all heard this come out of the Leah Young, Cody Young, for those of you who heard that interview, right? We've talked about this on Mormon Stories. We've talked about this on Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis. One of the most important things you could do for your health, happiness, and well-being is sit down and make a list of your values. 8, 10, 15, 5, whatever it is, figure out what your values are, write them down, make a list. If you've taken the proclamation on the family off your wall, that's fine. Cross-stitch your new list of values and replace the proclamation on the family with your own effing proclamation, right? Of your life. You can applaud at that. You can clap at that, right? And if you have a partner, come up with a combined list of values. And if you have kids, do an exercise where your family is coming up with a list of what your family's values are. And then post it somewhere, refer to it often. When you get depressed, right? When you get sad, when you're worrying about the future, when you're stuck regretting the past, what can you do? Here's what you do. You go to your list of values and you go down and you say, okay, I value service, I value creativity, I value kindness. What's something creative I can do today? Because that is something I value. Maybe I'll go paint. Maybe I'll go write a poem. Maybe I'll start a podcast. Whatever it is, creativity. Oh, service. I'll go serve in the soup kitchen. I'll go volunteer to man the camera for a retreat for a bunch of messed up post-Mormons that are trying to figure their lives out. Like whatever it is, right? Your values provide you with direction and motivation, right? And if I could just jump to number 7, 6 is knowing your values, and you don't really know them till you write them down. 7 is living your values, which involves what ACT calls committed action. And the reason why I feel so passionately about this, and this is very personal, and I always hesitate to talk about this, because it sounds like I'm boasting, but this is as therapeutic. The intent of this story is more therapeutic than anything I could ever offer you. And it's just simply this. When I went through my faith crisis, it was devastating. I didn't have a faith crisis because I hated the church and had been abused by it. I was the person that benefited from every aspect of the church because I'm a white, straight, male, right? And so I loved the church. It was everything to me. So when I lost my faith, it was like, for many of you, my entire world collapsing. I got depressed. I got irritable, not just for days, not just for weeks, but for years. I was lost to my wife and kids. And by the way, in 2000, 2001, there were no podcasts. There was no CES letter. There were no Facebook groups. There were no workshops or retreats for people in faith crisis. There was nothing. There was zero. Go to family, they don't want to talk about it. Go to the bishop, he has no idea what you're talking about. Everyone in the ward looks at you like you're crazy. And I was suffocating in the depressive state of dealing with the faith crisis. At the same time, I was searching for a purpose because my job, as much money as I was making, as happy as I should have been, knowing Bill Gates and working with Steve Ballmer and traveling the world, making a crap ton of money, I was depressed in my job because it wasn't fulfilling. And so I married those two things. And I said, I have found as depressed as I am, I'm not shaven, I'm wearing Birkenstocks and socks to work in church. Like, everything's terrible. But I found my special purpose. And so I did the craziest, stupid thing. I'm like, Margi, I'm leaving Microsoft. We're going to Logan. I'm going to go to grad school at age 35 or 40. And I am going to figure out how to make it so other people who go through this don't have it as difficult as I did. That was it. And it was the scariest thing I've ever done. We certainly lost $1 or $2 million in that decision by all the stock options and opportunities that I gave up. And I have not regretted that decision for one day. One day. Because what I did is I transformed my state of depression into a sense of meaning and purpose that has filled every single hole that losing my religion left inside my soul. Do I worry about community? I have the biggest and most beautiful community that I could ever want. Do I worry about friends? I have a lot of friends, or a lot of people that I could become friends with. Do I have spirituality? I told you about the hair standing up on my arms. Doing these retreats with you is the most sacred and spiritual thing. Do I have morality? All of those holes that religion filled, including meaning and purpose, has been replaced by this one decision of figuring out what I valued, which is serving others, which is finding a way to contribute to help people who have gone through something really hard. And by following that, it has fixed everything. And interestingly enough, now I'm able to kind of make a living at it. So I'm able to marry my passion with my need for income. And it's 12 years of no health insurance, and it was 12 years of no retirement, and 12 years of not a good income. But finally, it's even paid off in a sense where, we're not destitute. And so I don't say any of that to like lift myself up. I don't seek applause for that. But that is the most important object lesson I can offer to anyone who's trying to figure out how to get healthier or happier, is find out what that thing is for you. And it doesn't have to be activism. It doesn't have to be a podcast. It doesn't have to be externally focused. It can be pottery. It can be painting. It can be serving at the soup kitchen, volunteering in a nonprofit. It can be pursuing a new fulfilling career, teaching, whatever it is. You figure that out. That's your job. I'm just trying to say that knowing your values and then figuring out a way to follow them can all of a sudden radically transform your lives. And it's scary and it's risky, but I want you to consider that as you're trying to figure out how to get unstuck and where you want to go from here. All right?
That was pretty impassioned. I don't know what I'm going to offer after that. The only thing I would say is just, I think that in our tradition, we have conflated beliefs with values. So just be cautious of that, So a belief is very different than a value. So I can say, well, I believe in God, or I can say, well, I value a relationship with something universal or something divine, right? And so those, you can have a belief in God, but you want to still have a different value associated with that belief. So, and I think that, we'll talk a lot about this when we talk about communicating with family and friends, but what is usually so integral, not just to your own mental health, but your relationship with other people, is that the common denominators are usually values. And that's where you're going to most be able to find commonality with the people that you're really struggling with right now. So we can have very different beliefs. Most values are fairly universal, and that's been backed up by social research, such as like the golden rule. That's pretty much everywhere. There's not really a culture where you don't find some version of the golden rule. And so there's something really powerful in knowing your values and then knowing the language of values so that you can really connect with other people that you're struggling with right now.
And we'll talk about that in the session of communicating with believing family and friends. And in mixed faith marriages, values are the key to many of that. So really quickly, let's do some processing. Has anybody had any insight into some of their values? And yes, Abe, you're first. Anyone want to share anything about values, anything about committed action, something they want to do, some insight, anything? Stand up, brother.
Yeah, sorry. I have been actually really excited for this section. Sorry, I'm so anxious to share. But because I had a really meaningful... I did this year, and I just want to share a little bit about the process and some of the benefits that I found, because when Lily started going through her faith journey, all the way up until about 6 months ago, my life has pretty much always been in the box and in the convention, and it's all been pretty black or white, and the narrative's all been working. And then all of a sudden, when you're in a mixed faith marriage, you're in the gray. And then I read the CS letter. I'm ingesting everything Lily's sharing with you, and my own faith is crumbling. And it's like, okay, now there's no script now, And so how do I even stay intact? How do I stay functional, And 10 years ago, a friend had recommended a book to me, Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life. I think that's from ACT.
ACT is based on that.
And so I actually had known about this, and so I just put pen to paper, and I was on a ski trip with a work group. They're all chatting. I'm in the back of the van just crunching out my values, trying to figure this out. But a couple of things I want to say, at least for me, is very iterative. I probably spent 3 or 4 hours just getting it down, and I think a lot of what can maybe stop people or almost stopped me is you don't know right off the bat. And you just I just did a list of stuff, And I'm just like, I don't know. And then I did another look at it, and I spent another 3 hours. And I kind of, like, I'm going to cap it at 10 because it's going to force me to, like, really think through, like, what's top. And then, like, a month later, I visited again. I'm, like, tweaking language. And, I'm 6 months later, and I'm still wordsmithing it, right? But what it has done, and at one point I thought the church was a value, and then I realized, no, it's not. But the reason why I engaged, now I can understand it's connected to these other values. And it has really made my ability to work with Lily, it's helped a lot. Because in that process, I realized I value her over any institution, and that was a really big awareness. But it also allowed me to understand and be able to articulate to Lily why I do care about the church so much and, like, what values it's connected to. So that process and having those values has really helped my language. Like, one thing I've heard from other couples is, like, sometimes the spouse just won't talk or doesn't talk or just can't talk. Like, the values process helped me to be able to explain to Lily, like, this is why the church, this is why I want our kids to be in the church. These are the values it's connected to, and we can relate to each other on values. And it's been so grounding to me. Like, this is a really hard, crazy time in my life, but I do very regularly reference these values to connect to me when all the externalities are kind of chaotic and swirling around. I can kind of constantly connect to inwardly what I want and what I feel, and feel grounded that way, if that makes sense.
Beautiful. Who else?
First of all, I can't wait to get home, sit down with my family, and create my own proclamation of my values and hang it on my wall. That sounds amazing. There'll be a little bit of humor in it, but it'll be mostly good. It's interesting.
Humor can be a value.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting that a lot of times, and I see this with people that are on your podcast, John, I see it with other people that I talk to or blogs that I read, that when they have a faith crisis or they reach this kind of post-Mormon life, they have to question what their values are. What are they then now, right? Because maybe it used to be going to the temple, reading the scriptures, doing all these other things that we were told should be our values, but were they ever our values, right? And you have to kind of find your own, and a lot of people do, right? They say things like, I've never been so open about gender equality or, acceptance, real unconditional love, not judging people for what, they say their eyes are opened. And I think that it's important to kind of call it out, to think about it. All of us as a goal to kind of write those down and really kind of live by those, because I think it is important to replace what used to be our values or what we're told they were with what we really think that they are.
Is anyone struggling with this idea of values? Like, I don't know where to start, I'm confused, like I feel lost. Yeah? Anyone else? Yeah, here's one.
I'll just say real quick, one thing that was hard for me when I first kind of was going through this is not, so I would feel guilty if I had a value, if, there was something that I valued that was not in the Mormon script. So, like, speaking up as a woman, having power as a woman, or, just having my voice heard, those, or even just being able to have my own time. That to me was kind of looked at as sinful, or, you're not supposed to enjoy life, you're supposed to sacrifice all the time. So it's kind of selfish if you're wanting to go have a massage and, be away from your kids. So that was something that was so hard when I first kind of was to rewire my brain and say, that's okay. That's okay if I value feminism. That's okay if I value, being powerful as a woman. And if I value, traveling with my husband and not serving all the time or volunteering all the time. So that's just what I wanted to say about that.
This is a good topic. I know in 2000 there was the Stephen R. Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, and then his planner came out. And I remember I was a big believer in the Covey planner, and later became Franklin Covey, and I'd have my binder and pull it together, and you put your values down, and it took off. It was nationwide, worldwide. It had a Mormon theme, but it was kind of the ideas were really core and good. And now coming back to those, looking at that again, I haven't really thought of this for a while, but I remember being so excited when I'd write those goals down or those values, and then work towards goals towards each of those and checking those off and how good those made you feel. And even when you didn't write it down and you did it later, I'd still write it down so I could check it off because I still felt really good about it, and I'd have some history of it. And I think I still have binders from decades ago of those. So that's good. I am a little confused. I've gone through some transition of what are my values, because those were very Mormon-centric, be a good elders quorum president and do your home teaching and all that kind of stuff. But there were still lots of good values of being a good father, being a good leader and helping others. And so I have to look at those again. I like the idea of the proclamation to the family and coming up with my own. So this is good. Good things to think about, and I know they really motivated me at one point, so I'd like to do that again.
Well, about a month or so ago, I listened to the Margi. You did a podcast about building your family values, and I feel like that really did help me, because I was really felt like I was drowning at that point. Like, what do I do? Oh my gosh! And so a month or so, I think it was about a month ago, and I first listened to that, and I have been struggling though, because there's so many good, every value is good almost, you know what I mean? So it took me a while. I tried to do a little home evening with my kids, and that didn't go over so well, kind of turned into joking, laughing, I don't know, so I thought, okay, well, Jacob and I will just do it, and then come to them. And it's just been a long process of trying to and then it's funny, because I do have something up on our fridge right now, which has helped so much to give me purpose, to feel like, okay, I'm not just falling, but it's just how do you do it? I look at there, I'm like, oh, wow, I left off curiosity. That's a huge one, There's so many good ones, I don't know. It's just hard. How do you do something to the point that you can cross-stitch it and put it on a wall?
I love, let's clap first. I love the idea, I think, Abe, you were talking about it, that these lists are fluid and they're ongoing. And they should, you can do several cross-stitches over the next 10 years so that they're constantly evolving. I think it's also important, well, first of all, to say values are not behaviors, right? So doing home teaching is not a value. It would be more, the value would then be serving other people, right? So your behaviors are based on your values. And then the other thing I would say is just values can be in conflict with one another. For example, the massage, that you mentioned, that's a value of self-care. And I may also value sacrifice and service. So those two things are going to be, I'm going to have to figure out how my behavior, how my budget, how my time, the things that I don't have, exponential of, are going to be spent in balance, hopefully, with my values. So maybe my value of sacrifice is being overbalanced by my value of, self-care, or vice versa. So there's kind of some interesting ways to kind of frame this in a way that you can really find balance, find the complexities in it, and find the beauty in the fluidity of it and the ongoing evolution of your values.
And I'll just add, maybe one way to sift through your values is to not just have it be a list of shoulds. Well, I should serve, and I should be a good, husband or wife, or I should, because there's a list of 1,000 things we should be doing, right? But maybe pay attention to what stuff you're excited to do, right? And if you can find just a couple things or 5 things that it's not just that you should have that on your list, but it's like something you're excited to pursue. So it goes back to that, what turns you on, what lights you up. Maybe try and do a trial and error of which one of those things, because like Margi loves learning. She loves learning so much that she reads like 2 to 3 books a week, but she loves reading. I value learning, but when I try and read, I have a really hard time doing it. So I read 6 or 8 books a year, and usually only when I have to do a podcast about a book, and so I have to prepare. And so I would put reading or learning as a value, but it wouldn't be the best thing for me to put maybe because it doesn't light me up. Now recently I've rediscovered audiobooks and I realized that that's the best way for me to consume a book is to, so I figured that out over time. But when my value was, when my manifestation of my value was to read more books, but I didn't really enjoy reading books or I wasn't successful at it, then that value just became like a millstone that made me feel more guilt and shame, right? So start with the stuff that really lights you up and turns you on, and then over time, it'll become more clear, and you'll be able to add more things to it over time and massage it. But that's maybe one tip: is start with what lights you up.
And
not medicine. What are you excited to do versus like what do I have to hold my nose and do?
And what I think goes along with that is there are some things that it's okay to let go of in the sense of being good enough. Like I've had several women in my office talk about the guilt of not being a good mother. Like you said, I don't feel like I'm a good mother. So kind of deconstructing that. And you can be a good enough mother if that's not your big passion, right? But then you can get passionate about other things. And even that example is part of being, I think, a good parent, to see your kids see you be passionate about something. So I think back to it shouldn't be a should list, right? Because I think most of us would probably agree that being a good parent, whatever that means, is probably a value we have. But making sure that you're not painting that in a way that, like you're saying, actually makes you more depressed or guilty. Because then we fall back into that cultural script, right, that we're not good enough. So there's lots of things in life that you can just be good enough at, not necessarily passionate about.
Love that. Yeah. Just to follow on that, like in this Mormon world, motherhood is what a woman should care most about. One of the most, do you remember this in St. George? We had a woman get up in the audience and say, I have a confession to make. Do you remember what she said?
I hate being a mother.
She's like, I love my kids, but I hate being a mom. I hate it. Yeah. And I feel guilty that I hate it, but I do. But I didn't know until I had kids that I hated it. And how many of you feel enthralled and fulfilled changing diapers and cleaning up spit up and making food for, I get it. So I really like this idea. Some women are better mothers when they work outside the home. Because if they have that job, if they have that fulfillment, if they have that source of income, that source of power, that source of strength, that may be the value pursuing a career. But magically, they're less grouchy with their kids. They're setting a better example of empowerment for their daughters and even their sons. And in the end, by pursuing that value of pursuing a career, it magically transforms and improves their role of motherhood, even though it was sort of a side benefit. Does that make sense? So that's just an instance of where going with what lights you up can actually improve a should. Does that make sense? Yeah.
And I just wanted to add to that, what helped me when I think about this is to start with questions like, who would I be if I wasn't being somebody for others? And to start sort of visualizing who I am in that way in sort of a, abstract way, not like in a title way or a set role. And then And to be able to make a list of values and not place any judgment on what you've just written down. Not be like, oh, good for me, I put service down. Or bad for me, I put, whatever down, because I think that's a separate issue. And I think it's fine to acknowledge, like, we have preconceived judgments about what should or should not come to us. But I think it's an amazing experience to be like, in a way, as if you were the only person on the earth. Who would I be? What would drive me? How would I spend my time? And if you weren't somebody for everybody else.
All right. Well, those are our 7 tools for better mental health. Do the thing you've been avoiding. Accept what is. Hold labels, stories, and feelings loosely. Live in the present moment. Discover your authentic self through mindfulness. Determine and write down your values, and then live your values.